Everything happens for a reason. In a distant kingdom, cradled by towering mountains where the night wind sang through ancient cedar forests, there ruled a mighty king. His palace was built of gleaming white stone and burnished gold. Crystal fountains whispered through magnificent gardens. Peacocks wandered gracefully among rows of towering cypress trees, and the palace domes shimmered as though they had captured the first light of dawn itself. He possessed everything a ruler could desire: immeasurable wealth, a magnificent kingdom, and an army whose loyalty was beyond question. Yet above all these treasures, he cherished one gift more than any other: his closest friend. A wise counselor who had stood beside him since they were young men. They had fought shoulder to shoulder in battle, celebrated victories together, endured seasons of hardship, and spent countless nights discussing life beneath the stars. The counselor sought neither glory nor reward. He never feared speaking the truth, even when that truth displeased the king. And whenever fortune smiled or tragedy struck, his answer was always the same: everything happens for a reason, and always for the greater good. Many within the royal court despised those words. Some dismissed them as naive optimism. Others considered them almost insulting. How could anyone claim that suffering, loss, or misfortune could possibly serve a greater purpose? But the king valued his friend above all other advisors, because his loyalty was unquestionable and his honesty could never be bought. Still, he often laughed at the counselor's unwavering conviction. "You say those words far too easily," the king would remark with a smile. "Can everything that happens truly be called good?" The counselor answered with quiet certainty, "I never said everything is pleasant, my king." He paused before continuing, "I said that everything leads us where we are meant to go." The king would simply shake his head, amused, unable to share such faith. One morning, the finest swordsmiths from the east presented the king with a newly forged blade. Its edge was so flawless it seemed carved from a beam of moonlight. Eager to test his magnificent gift, the king lifted the sword high into the air. With one swift motion, he swung it, but his grip slipped. The razor-sharp blade flashed. A cry echoed through the throne hall. The tip of his thumb fell onto the white marble floor. Scarlet drops splashed across the polished stone. The entire court gasped. Royal physicians rushed forward. Clenching his jaw against the pain, the king hissed, "Cursed sword!" The counselor calmly approached, examined the wound for a brief moment, and quietly said, "Everything happens for a reason, and always for the greater good." Silence fell over the throne room. Even the physician froze. Only the slow rhythm of blood striking the marble could be heard. The king's face darkened with fury. "For the greater good?" he roared. "I have just lost part of my hand, and that is all you have to say?" The counselor never looked away. "Yes, my king." His voice remained calm. "I do not yet know how, but I believe that even this will one day reveal itself as a blessing." Those words ignited the king's anger. "Enough!" His voice thundered beneath the vaulted ceiling. "I have endured your strange philosophy long enough." He pointed toward the great bronze doors. "Take him away. Throw him into the dungeon." The royal guards hesitated. No one wished to lay hands upon the king's oldest friend. but a king's command could not be ignored. As the guards escorted him away, the counselor neither resisted nor complained. He bowed respectfully before his sovereign. Then, looking directly into the king's eyes one final time, he spoke with the same quiet peace he had always carried within him. Everything happens for a reason, and always for the greater good. Those final words only deepened the king's wrath. And with that, the heavy iron doors of the dungeon closed behind the wisest man in the kingdom. Several days passed. The king's wound slowly began to heal, yet his heart did not. Whenever he looked at the scar where the tip of his thumb had once been, irritation stirred within him once more. And with it came the memory of his friend's infuriating words. Everything happens for a reason. Determined to clear his mind, the king set out on a royal hunt in the vast forests that stretched beneath the shadow of the Black Mountains. A company of knights rode with him through the wilderness. Then, as if born from the morning mist itself, a magnificent white stag appeared among the trees. No hunter in the kingdom had ever captured such a creature. Driven by instinct and pride, the king spurred his horse forward. The stag vanished deeper into the forest. The chase grew faster. Branches clawed at his cloak. The towering trees swallowed the daylight. A cold mist crept silently across the forest floor. Before long, the thunder of his companions' horses had faded into silence. Only then did the king realize he was completely alone. An uneasy stillness settled over the woods. Even the birds had fallen silent. Then, figures emerged from the shadows. Men carrying spears, bows, and axes surrounded him from every direction. Their faces were painted with ash and crimson clay. Their eyes revealed neither hatred nor mercy, only ritual. Before the king could draw his sword, they seized him. His hands were bound, his weapons were taken. Without a single word, they led him deeper into the heart of the forest. Hours seemed to pass before the trees finally opened into a vast stone clearing. Ancient monoliths encircled the place like silent guardians forgotten by time. Great fires blazed beneath the darkening sky. Smoke coiled upward toward the heavens. Drums echoed through the valley like the beating heart of the earth itself. There, the king finally understood. This was no ordinary tribe. It was a people devoted to ancient gods, and they were preparing a sacrifice. His sacrifice. A chill unlike any he had ever known ran through his body. Kings feared defeat. Warriors feared dishonor. But every man, no matter his crown, recognizes the face of death when it stands before him. The tribesmen carried him toward a massive stone altar blackened by the passing of countless rituals. They laid him upon the cold rock. Leather straps tightened around his wrists. The drums grew louder, faster, relentless. The high priest stepped forward. In his hands rested an enormous ceremonial blade, its edge glimmering in the firelight. He slowly lifted it toward the sky. The tribe raised their voices in an ancient chant. The king closed his eyes. This, he believed, was the end. But just as the blade began its descent, a commanding voice shattered the ritual. "Stop!" Instantly, every drum fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The tribal chief approached the altar. He studied the king carefully. His gaze traveled from the crown upon his head to his face to his hands. Then he frowned. Disappointment spread across his weathered face. He reached down and seized the king's injured hand. The scar. The missing tip of the thumb. The chief released it as though he had touched something unclean. "No," His voice echoed across the sacred stones. The offering must be perfect. He raised the king's wounded hand for all to see. This man is marked. He is flawed. Our gods accept no imperfect sacrifice. A murmur swept through the gathered tribe. The priests lowered the ceremonial blade. Moments later, the leather bindings were cut. The king stared in disbelief as his hands were freed. Without another word, the tribesmen stepped aside. They were letting him go. The king mounted his horse and rode through the forest with all the strength he had left. He scarcely remembered the journey home. Only one thing echoed endlessly inside his mind. His friend's voice. Calm, steady, unshaken. Everything happens for a reason, and always for the greater good. At last, he understood. Had he not lost part of his thumb that day in the palace, he would have lost his life upon that altar. The moment the king returned to his palace, he gave only one command. Release him. The dungeon doors swung open. The old counselor stepped into the throne room with the same quiet composure he had carried into the prison. He looked neither bitter nor wounded. He walked as though he had simply returned from a peaceful morning stroll. The entire court watched in silence. Then something happened that no one expected. The king descended from his throne, crossed the great hall, and embraced his friend. I was wrong, he said, his voice heavy with remorse. Forgive me. He stepped back and looked into the counselor's eyes. You spoke the truth. He raised his injured hand. This wound, he paused, saved my life. The throne room remained perfectly still as the king recounted everything that had happened. The white stag, the lonely forest, the tribe, the stone altar, the ancient ritual, and the moment when the chief noticed the scar upon his hand. When they saw my injured thumb, he finished quietly. They declared that I was unworthy to be offered as a sacrifice. A long silence followed. Then the king lowered his head. I understand now. If I had never lost part of my thumb, I would never have returned home. The counselor smiled gently. I am grateful that you did. But the king's expression clouded once more. There is something else. His voice had become almost a whisper. I wronged you. I allowed anger to master me. I repaid your loyalty with chains. I cast my closest friend into a dungeon. He looked at the floor, unable to meet the counselor's eyes. Can you ever forgive me? The counselor's smile never faded. My king, there is nothing to forgive. The king looked up in confusion. What do you mean? The old man gave a quiet laugh. Have you forgotten? If you had not imprisoned me, I would have ridden beside you on the hunt. The king's eyes widened. The realization struck him with the force of lightning. The counselor continued softly. Your wound made you imperfect. But I would have been the perfect offering. The words settled over the throne room like falling snow. No one dared breathe. No one dared speak. The king slowly sank onto the marble steps below his throne. His eyes remained fixed upon the man he had condemned only days before. At last he whispered, Then, even the prison was for the greater good. He struggled to find the words. My anger, my pride, my injustice, even my cruelty. Was all of it somehow woven into a greater purpose? The counselor stepped forward and offered the king his hand. The king accepted it. The old man helped him rise. Then he answered with the same calm certainty that had never left him. Yes. Sometimes providence closes one door only to keep us from walking a road that would have led to our destruction. The king remained silent. For the first time in many years, he realized that wisdom is not measured by power, but by trust. Trust in what cannot yet be understood. That evening, the king and his old friend climbed to the highest tower of the palace. Night had settled gently over the kingdom. A sea of stars stretched across the heavens, brilliant enough to make the world below seem small and silent. For a long while, neither of them spoke. At last, the king broke the silence. Tell me honestly, he gazed into the endless sky. Do you truly believe that everything happens for the greater good? Even suffering? Even loss? Even injustice? The counselor did not answer at once. His eyes remained fixed upon the stars, as though he were reading words written across eternity itself. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I believe that a human being sees only a single thread, while the Creator beholds the entire tapestry. We judge life by a single moment, but heaven judges it by the whole journey. What appears today to be a tragedy may one day reveal itself as our salvation. He turned toward the king. To say that everything happens for the greater good does not mean that everything is pleasant. It means that even in our darkest hour, when we believe all hope has vanished, the hand of providence is already weaving the pattern of our rescue. Our task is not to curse the darkness, but to keep walking through it with faith. Because what seems like the end is often only the beginning of the road that leads us home. The old man slowly raised his hand toward the sky. Look at the night. If you stare only at one patch of darkness, you may believe the whole universe is empty. But lift your eyes, and you will discover the stars. The king stood in silence. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, So wisdom is not the absence of suffering. The counselor smiled. No. Wisdom is trusting life, even when life wounds you. Another silence followed. This one felt different. It was not empty. It was peaceful. For the first time in many years, the king looked upon the world without demanding that he understand every twist of its path. Instead, he simply trusted that there was one who already did. From that day forward, the king was never the same. When famine struck the land, he did not surrender to despair. When battles were lost, he did not curse his fate. When life unfolded in ways he could not understand, he remembered the scar upon his hand and the words of his oldest friend. Whenever he saw people crushed beneath disappointment or grief, he would gently tell them, Do not be too quick to judge today. What feels like a curse may one day reveal itself as a blessing you cannot yet see. And the old counselor would simply smile, for he already knew. Sometimes, a wound saves a life. Sometimes, A closed door is the doorway to deliverance. Sometimes, a prison becomes a refuge. And sometimes, what first appears to be life's greatest cruelty becomes its greatest mercy. That is why we should never rush to declare our story finished, while heaven is still writing the next chapter. For the author sees far beyond the page we are living today. And though we may understand only fragments, his design is always greater than our understanding. The king and the philosopher walked on together for the rest of their days, not because every road before them became easy, but because they had learned something far more valuable. Faith does not grow from knowing the future. It grows from trusting the one who holds it. And perhaps that is the greatest wisdom of all.